I'm Elizabeth, 28 female. I live in a modest downtown apartment that is my one true sanctuary from the pressures of my life, which until recently revolved entirely around my family's logistics company. For 10 years, I poured every ounce of myself into a business I thought I was helping to build, only to discover I was just a placeholder, a convenient scapegoat for the real heir. This is the story of how I was cast out by my own father to protect my brother's devastating mistake, and how, in the ruins of my career, I found the one piece of evidence that could burn their empire to the ground. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. From the moment we were born, the roles were set. Daniel was the heir, and I was the helper. He was 4 years older, a boy born to inherit the throne of Thompson Freight, the logistics company our grandfather started and our father, Arthur, expanded into a regional powerhouse. I was the daughter, the one who was expected to be supportive, diligent, and above all, invisible when it mattered. Growing up, our home life was a reflection of the future Arthur envisioned for the company. Daniel's successes, no matter how small, were celebrated with fanfare. A decent report card would be framed. A winning goal in a soccer game would be the talk of the dinner table for a week. My achievements were met with a quiet nod and an expectation to do even better. Acing an exam was simply what was expected. Becoming valedictorian was a nice thing for your college applications. This dynamic bled directly into our professional lives. When I graduated from college with a degree in business administration and supply chain management, summa cum laude, I was given a junior-level position in the operations department. "You'll learn the business from the ground up, Elizabeth," Arthur had said, his tone suggesting this was a great favor. "Nothing is handed to you here." Daniel, on the other hand, who had scraped through with a marketing degree from a less prestigious university, was given the title of Director of Business Development and a corner office next to my father's. The hypocrisy was so blatant it was almost laughable, but I bit my tongue and decided to prove my worth through hard work. I told myself that merit would eventually win out. I was young and naive. I spent the next 6 years climbing the ladder one painful rung at a time. I started by managing warehouse schedules, then optimizing delivery routes, then overseeing fleet maintenance. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I knew the names of every driver, every dispatcher, and every mechanic. I understood the intricate dance of our operations better than anyone, including my father. Eventually, my results were too significant to ignore, and I was promoted to operations manager. I had my own small office, a team that respected me, and the crushing weight of responsibility for the company's entire logistical network. I loved it. I thrived on the problem-solving, the constant challenge of making things more efficient, safer, and more profitable. I streamlined our fuel consumption policies, saving the company hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I implemented a new tracking system that reduced lost cargo by nearly 30%. Arthur would acknowledge these successes in board meetings with a curt, "Good work, Elizabeth," before immediately turning the floor over to Daniel. Daniel, in his role as VP of Business Development, was the face of the company. His job was to wine and dine potential clients, attend conferences, and talk about synergy and disruption. He was charming, handsome, and knew how to sell a dream. The problem was, he had no grasp of the practical realities of our business. He would promise clients impossible delivery timelines or agree to razor-thin margins that my department would then have to magically accommodate. I would often find myself in late-night meetings with my father, explaining why Daniel's latest, groundbreaking deal was a logistical nightmare that would actually cost us money. Arthur would listen, a frown creasing his brow, and then say, "Just make it work, Elizabeth. Your brother is bringing in the business. Your job is to support that." The favoritism was an open secret among the senior staff. Margaret, the company's CFO and a woman who had been with the company since my grandfather's time, would often give me a sympathetic look after these meetings. She saw my value, my dedication. She saw Daniel for what he was, a charismatic but reckless salesman coasting on his family name. She was my only real ally in the corporate structure, a silent partner in my struggle for recognition. "Just keep documenting your work, honey," she'd tell me in her quiet, raspy voice. "Numbers don't lie, even if people do." I took her advice to heart, keeping meticulous records of every project, every cost-saving initiative, and every instance where I had to clean up one of Daniel's messes. I thought I was building a case for my own competence, but in reality, I was gathering evidence for a trial I never saw coming. The tension came to a head when Daniel announced he was close to landing the deal of the decade with a new e-commerce giant called Swiftbox. It was a massive contract, potentially doubling our annual revenue. Daniel was ecstatic, preening under our father's proud gaze. I, however, was terrified. Swiftbox was known for its aggressive demands and unforgiving penalty clauses. Their model required a level of speed and precision that our current infrastructure couldn't handle without a significant overhaul. I voiced my concerns in a meeting with Arthur and Daniel. "We need to upgrade our sorting technology, hire at least 50 more drivers, and expand our West Coast hub before we can even think about meeting their service-level agreement," I explained, pointing to a detailed projection I had spent a week preparing. "The initial capital investment will be close to $7 million. Daniel scoffed. "You're thinking too small, Lizzie. This is a game changer. We can absorb the initial strain. You're always so negative." Arthur sided with him, as always. "Your brother has a vision, Elizabeth. Don't be an obstacle. He's secured a preliminary agreement. Now go figure out the logistics." The dismissal was sharp, final. I left the room with a cold knot in my stomach. He wasn't asking for my professional opinion, he was giving me an order. I was to make an impossible promise a reality, and if it failed, I had a sinking feeling I knew who would be blamed. The stage was being set, the actors were in their places, and I was being positioned perfectly to take the fall. I just didn't realize how devastating that fall would be. The golden son was about to make his boldest move yet, and I, the scapegoat, was being led straight to the altar of sacrifice. I doubled down on my work, trying desperately to build the operational capacity we needed, hoping against hope that my diligence could somehow avert the disaster I saw looming on the horizon. It was a fool's errand. The disaster wasn't on the horizon, it was already in the house. The Swiftbox contract was signed with a lavish dinner and a press release that featured a beaming photo of Arthur and Daniel. I wasn't invited. My role was to stay behind and manage the chaos as the first wave of their shipments began flooding our system. For the first 2 months, it was a waking nightmare. My team and I worked 18-hour days, patching holes in a system stretched to its breaking point. We rerouted trucks on the fly, paid exorbitant overtime to warehouse staff, and begged our dispatchers to perform miracles. We were hemorrhaging money on operational inefficiencies, but we were just about keeping our heads above water. We were meeting the delivery targets, but only just. I presented weekly reports to Arthur, detailing the mounting costs and warning that the situation was unsustainable. Each report was met with a dismissive wave. "These are just growing pains," he'd say. "Daniel projects will be in the black by the end of the second quarter." Daniel's projections were pure fantasy. He had secured the contract by underbidding so aggressively that our profit margin was virtually non-existent. Worse, he had agreed to a series of draconian penalty clauses without, it seemed, actually reading them. Any shipment delayed by more than 12 hours incurred a fine. A delay of 24 hours meant we forfeited the entire shipping fee for that item. If our on-time delivery rate dropped below 98% for a single month, Swiftbox could terminate the contract and impose a multi-million-dollar service failure penalty. Daniel had essentially bet the company on our ability to perform perfectly under impossible conditions. The breaking point came in the 3rd month. A severe winter storm swept across the Midwest, shutting down major highways for 3 days. It was a once-in-a-decade weather event, an act of God that should have been covered by a force majeure clause in any standard contract. I immediately invoked the clause with our other clients, who were all understanding. I tried to do the same with Swiftbox, but their legal team responded within an hour. They pointed to a specific subsection in the contract, buried deep in the appendices, that Daniel had apparently initialed. It explicitly waived our right to claim force majeure for any weather-related disruptions. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read the email. He had signed it away. The one standard protection every logistics company relies on, and he had signed it away. He had probably been so eager to close the deal that he'd agreed to whatever they put in front of him without consulting our legal department. I stormed into my father's office, the contract printout trembling in my hand. "Did you know about this?" I demanded, pointing to the clause. Arthur took the papers, his eyes scanning the page. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of shock, of genuine fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of cold authority. "Handle it, Elizabeth." "Handle it?" I asked, my voice rising. "How? Thousands of our shipments are stranded. We're going to be hit with hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, in penalties. There's nothing to handle. Daniel gave away our only protection." At that moment, Daniel walked in, a smug smile on his face. "What's all the shouting about? Did you see our volume numbers this week? They're incredible." I rounded on him. "Did you read the contract, Daniel? Did you even read the force majeure clause before you initialed it?" His smile faltered. It was standard boilerplate stuff. Their lawyers said it was non-negotiable. "It wasn't boilerplate," I yelled. "They stripped it, they played you for a fool, and you let them." The full weight of the situation finally seemed to dawn on him. His face went pale. He looked at our father, a scared little boy searching for protection. Arthur's jaw was tight. He looked from his panicked son to me, his furious but competent daughter. And in that moment, he made his choice. He chose the heir, not the asset. "That's enough, Elizabeth," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low. "Your department is responsible for managing disruptions. This falls on you. You failed to prepare adequate contingencies." I stared at him, dumbfounded. Contingencies? For a historic blizzard that the contract specifically prevents me from using as a defense? This isn't an operational failure, it's a contractual one. It's his failure. I jabbed a finger toward Daniel. "I will not have you shifting blame and disrespecting your brother," Arthur snapped. "You are the operations manager. The operation failed. The responsibility is yours. End of discussion." The penalties from Swiftbox were catastrophic. By the end of the week, they totaled over $1.5 million. The board of directors, a small group of long-time investors who usually rubber-stamped my father's decisions, was in an uproar. An emergency meeting was called. I walked into the boardroom prepared to defend myself, armed with every report, every email, every warning I had ever issued about the Swiftbox deal. I never got the chance to speak. Arthur opened the meeting with a somber tone. He spoke of unforeseen challenges, of an unprecedented weather event, and of a critical failure in operational planning. He announced that, after a thorough internal review, he had identified a severe lapse in judgment within the operations department. He never said my name, but every eye in the room turned to me. He concluded by saying that to restore confidence and ensure accountability, he had made the difficult decision to accept the resignation of the head of that department. It was a public execution. I sat in stunned silence as he sacrificed me to save Daniel. Daniel, for his part, sat beside him looking grave and concerned, playing the part of the dutiful executive pained by his sister's failure. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that I couldn't even form words. After the meeting, Arthur called me into his office. He didn't look at me. He just slid a severance agreement across his desk. "This is generous, Elizabeth. I suggest you sign it and leave quietly. Don't make this any messier than it has to be." "But you know it was Daniel," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "You know it was his fault." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were like chips of ice. "Daniel is the future of this company. Sometimes, sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. You should understand that." I didn't sign the papers. I simply stood up, turned my back on him, and walked out of the office I had dedicated my life to. As I packed the few personal items from my desk into a cardboard box, my team watched in shocked silence. They knew. They all knew who was really to blame. But they also knew who held the power. As I walked out of the building for the last time, I felt a cold, hard rage solidifying in my chest. They thought they could just throw me away like garbage to cover up their own incompetence. They thought I would go quietly. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had made the mistake of thinking I was just a scapegoat. They were about to find out I was a witness. The first week after my ousting was a blur of shock and grief. I spent most of it on my couch, cycling through rage, disbelief, and a profound sense of emptiness. The company wasn't just my job, it was my entire identity. My father and brother hadn't just fired me, they had amputated a part of my soul. The severance agreement sat on my coffee table, a constant reminder of their attempt to buy my silence. Every time I looked at it, the rage earned a little hotter. They expected me to take the money, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and simply vanish. The injustice of it all was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. My stupor was broken by a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello. Elizabeth, it's Margaret. Her voice was low and cautious. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I got your personal number from your emergency contact file before HR deleted it. Hearing her voice was like a lifeline. Margaret, no, you're not disturbing me. It's good to hear from you. I'm so sorry, honey, she said, and I could hear the genuine sorrow in her tone. What they did to you in that boardroom was a disgrace. Arthur should be ashamed of himself. He made his choice, I said, my voice flat. He chose his son over the truth. He did, she agreed. But the truth has a way of coming out. Listen, I can't talk for long, I'm at the office, but I want you to know something. What you suspected about Daniel, it's worse than you think. The Swiftbox deal wasn't just negligence. There are whispers. Whispers, what are you talking about? I sat up, my heart starting to beat a little faster. People are talking about Daniel's lifestyle. He's been spending money, Elizabeth, a lot of money, more than his salary could possibly cover. A new sports car, a down payment on a luxury condo. Arthur just thinks he's being a successful young executive, but the numbers don't add up for me. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, she said carefully. I'm a numbers person, and I'm just telling you that there's a discrepancy. And I'm also telling you that the Swiftbox contract negotiator, a man named Marcus Thorne, resigned from his position 2 weeks after the deal was signed. Said he was leaving to start his own consulting firm. The pieces started to click in my mind, forming a hazy but sinister picture. Daniel's recklessness, his desperation to land the deal at any cost, the impossibly one-sided contract, his sudden influx of cash. It couldn't be, could it? A kickback? A bribe? The idea was so audacious, so sleazy, that it seemed almost impossible. Daniel was incompetent, but was he corrupt? Margaret, do you have any proof? No, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Nothing solid, it's all just smoke. But you know what they say about smoke, Elizabeth. I'm the CFO. I can see the company's financials, but I can't see Daniel's personal accounts. And Arthur has his own expenses firewalled so tightly I'd need a court order to get a look. But you were in operations. You had access to different systems. Communication logs, server archives. She didn't need to finish the sentence. A cold clarity washed over me. For 6 years, as I clawed my way up, I had become an expert in the company's digital infrastructure. I had overseen the implementation of our current email servers and our cloud-based file storage system. While my user access had been revoked the moment I was fired, I knew the architecture of those systems intimately. I knew their vulnerabilities. And more importantly, I remembered that as part of a disaster recovery protocol I'd implemented 2 years ago, I had created a deep-level, encrypted admin account for myself. It was a backdoor, intended only for a catastrophic system failure. They would have deactivated my primary account, but it was highly unlikely they'd even know the recovery account existed. Thank you, Margaret, I said, my voice steady and firm for the first time in a week. Thank you for this. "Be careful, Elizabeth," she warned. "Arthur is circling the wagons. He's protecting Daniel at all costs. If they find out you're poking around, they'll come after you with everything they have." "Let them," I said, a grim determination hardening my resolve. "They've already taken my career. They've taken my family. They have nothing left to take." After we hung up, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a purpose. The grief was gone, replaced by a singular focus. My father had called me an obstacle. My brother had called me negative. They had painted me as a failure. Now, I would show them what I really was. That night, I dug out my old personal laptop. It took me hours to set up a series of virtual private networks, bouncing my signal through servers in 3 different countries. It was a precaution, but a necessary one. I didn't want to leave any tracks. My hands trembled slightly as I navigated to the company's remote login portal. I entered the username for the recovery account, a complex alphanumeric string I had memorized long ago. I typed in the password. My heart pounded in my chest as I hit enter. For a tense moment, the screen just showed a loading icon. I thought they must have found it, deleted it. And then, the screen flickered, and the familiar interface of the Thomson Freight internal server directory loaded. Small, triumphant smile touched my lips. I was in. I wasn't a scapegoat anymore. I was a ghost in their machine. The whispers Margaret had told me about were my starting point. I wasn't just looking for proof that Daniel had been negligent. I was looking for proof that he was a criminal. I didn't know what I would find in the digital labyrinth of the company I had helped build, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to uncover the rot at the heart of my family's business, and I was going to expose it to the world. The hunt had begun. Navigating the company's server felt like walking through a house I had built, but in the dark. I knew the layout, the architecture, but I had to move silently, carefully, touching nothing that might alert the current occupants to my presence. My first target was Daniel's email archive. His primary inbox would be too risky, any access would be logged. But the company's backup server was a different story. It created a snapshot of everything every 24 hours, and access logs for the backup system were far less scrutinized. I spent the first night sifting through months of his emails, and it was a nauseating journey into his arrogance and incompetence. I saw the countless emails from my own department, flagged as urgent, that he had clearly never even opened. I saw the sycophantic messages he exchanged with clients, promising the world without a single thought to the consequences. But there was nothing explicitly incriminating about the Swiftbox deal. He had been careful or lucky. All of his official communication with Marcus Thorne, the Swiftbox negotiator, was professional and above board. Just as I was about to give up for the night, I found something odd. It was a calendar invitation from 3 months before the deal was signed. The event was titled Dinner, and the only attendee listed besides Daniel was an email address from a generic, non-corporate domain. The location was a notoriously expensive steakhouse downtown. There was nothing inherently suspicious about that, except that the dinner was scheduled for a Tuesday night, and I knew for a fact that Daniel had told everyone he was flying to a conference in Chicago that day. I had even arranged his transport to the airport. My curiosity piqued, I cross-referenced the flight details I had booked for him. The flight was real, but I found something I hadn't noticed before. A cancellation confirmation, time-stamped just 1 hour after he was supposedly in the air. He had never gone to Chicago. He had lied. Why lie about a simple dinner meeting? I focused on the generic email address from the calendar invite. A quick search revealed it was registered to a shell corporation with no listed officers and a mailing address that traced back to a P.O. box. A dead end. But the name of the shell corporation itself, Silver Creek Holdings, felt vaguely familiar. I ran a search for that name across the entire company server. I got one hit. It was in a deeply buried folder in the accounting department's archives, a place only a CFO or a high-level auditor should be able to access. But my ghost account had no such restrictions. The file was a scanned image of an expense report. It was from Daniel for the Chicago conference. He had submitted receipts for the flight he never took, the hotel he never stayed in, and a series of lavish meals he claimed were with prospective clients. But tucked at the very end of the scanned PDF was a final receipt that must have been included by mistake. It was from the downtown steakhouse for the same night as the mysterious dinner. The total was astronomical, over $2,000 for two people. And at the bottom of the receipt, there was a handwritten note: "Pleasure doing business, MT." MT Marcus Thorne. My blood ran cold. Daniel hadn't just lied, he had falsified an expense report to cover up a secret meeting with the man from Swiftbox. A meeting where they had apparently racked up a $2,000 bill. This was more than just smoke. This was the fire. I knew I needed more. A falsified expense report and a secret dinner were damning, but not enough to prove a bribe. I needed to find the money trail. Margaret had said she couldn't see Daniel's personal accounts, but I had an idea. For payroll purposes, all senior employees had to have their bank account information on file with HR. Those files were heavily encrypted, but I had designed the encryption protocol. I knew its weakness. It took me another full day to carefully bypass the security layers. It felt deeply violating, but I reminded myself of the boardroom, of my father's icy dismissal. They had forfeited any right to privacy when they decided to ruin my life. Finally, I was in. I found Daniel's file and the routing and account numbers for his personal checking account at a large national bank. This was the key. Now came the riskiest part. I couldn't hack a bank, but I could see the information to see if there were any links back to our own company. I went back to the accounting archives and began a painstaking search. I wasn't looking for money going to Daniel. I was looking for money going out of Thompson Freight that was disguised, miscategorized, or hidden. I spent days sifting through thousands of transactions, cross-referencing vendor payments, consulting fees, and miscellaneous expenses. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets until 4 in the morning. And then I found it, a series of payments made over 3 months to a consulting firm I had never heard of, Silver Creek Holdings, the same name as the Shell Corporation. The payments were listed as market analysis and strategy consulting. They were for large, round numbers: $50,000, $75,000, another $50,000. The total came to $175,000. The payment authorizations were signed by two people: my father, Arthur, and my brother, Daniel. My father knew this wasn't just Daniel going rogue. My father had authorized these payments. He had helped Daniel pay a bribe. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I looked at the dates. The first payment to Silver Creek Holdings was made 1 week after Daniel's secret dinner with Marcus Thorne. The final payment was made the day after the Swiftbox contract was signed. It was a bribe, laundered through a shell company as consulting fees, and my father had signed off on it. He hadn't just protected his son after the fact, he had been a co-conspirator from the beginning. The $1 million mistake wasn't the penalty clause, that was just the consequence. The real mistake was the crime they had committed to get the deal in the first place. I carefully downloaded everything: the calendar invite, the falsified expense report, the secret steakhouse receipt, the scanned payment authorizations to the shell company, and screenshots of Daniel's banking information from the HR file. I encrypted the files and saved them to a secure, anonymous cloud storage account, then transferred them to a thumb drive for good measure. As I stared at the drive in my hand, I felt a strange sense of calm. The rage had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. I had the truth. It was a truth that could not only exonerate me but could also destroy the two men who had betrayed me. Margaret's whispers had led me to a trail of digital breadcrumbs, and that trail had led me straight to the rotten core of my family. Now, I had to decide how to use it. A simple exposé wasn't enough. They deserved more than just public shame. They deserved a reckoning. With the evidence secure, my first instinct was to go to the press or the authorities. But I quickly dismissed that idea. A public scandal would drag the entire company through the mud, hurting the hundreds of innocent employees who depended on it for their livelihoods. My team, the drivers, the dispatchers, They didn't deserve to lose their jobs because of the corruption of the men at the top. And going to the authorities would lead to a long, drawn-out investigation, where Arthur and Daniel could use the company's vast resources to bury me in legal fees and paint me as a disgruntled, vengeful ex-employee. No, my revenge had to be surgical. I needed to remove the cancer without killing the patient. My target became singular. I had to get my father and my brother out of the company, permanently. I needed to force them out in a way that left the business intact and put someone trustworthy in charge. And the only person who fit that description was Margaret. I called her again, this time from a secure pay-as-you-go burner phone. "Margaret, it's me. I need to see you. In person, not at your home, not at my apartment. Somewhere public but private." We met 2 days later in a quiet corner of the city's botanical garden. She looked older, more tired than I had ever seen her. The stress at the company was clearly taking its toll. "Are you okay, Elizabeth?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm better than okay," I said, my voice low and steady. I pulled a tablet from my bag, unlocked it, and showed her the files. I walked her through everything, step by step. The fake trip to Chicago, the secret dinner with Marcus Thorne, the falsified expense report, the shell company, and finally, the payment authorizations with both Daniel's and Arthur's signatures. As she scrolled through the documents, her face went from concerned to shocked to utterly furious. She looked up from the tablet, her eyes blazing. "That son of a... He didn't just protect his boy, he was in on it. Arthur co-signed a bribe. They paid $175,000 to Marcus Thorne's shell company to get him to agree to that garbage contract," I explained. "The contract that included the penalty clauses that cost the company millions. They didn't just commit a crime, they did it incompetently. They paid a bribe to get a deal that was designed to fail." Margaret leaned back on the bench, letting out a long, slow breath. "This is dynamite, Elizabeth. This could send them both to prison." "I know," I said, "but that's not the goal. The goal is to save the company from them. The board of directors needs to see this. Not the press, not the police, the board." The board consisted of 5 members besides my father. 2 were old family friends who would likely side with Arthur no matter what. But the other 3 were external investors, business people who had put their own money on the line. They were pragmatic and ruthless. Their loyalty was to their investment, not to the Thompson family name. Those 3 were our targets. "They'll be furious," Margaret said, a slow, strategic smile spreading across her face. "They'll demand Arthur and Daniel's immediate resignation. They'll have no choice. The threat of SEC violations and shareholder lawsuits would be immense." "Exactly," I said. "But we can't just drop this in their laps. We need a plan. When this bomb goes off, there will be a power vacuum. The board will panic. They'll need a steady hand to take the reins immediately. Someone who knows the company inside and out, who has their complete trust, and who can clean up this mess." Margaret looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Me." "You," I confirmed. "You're the CFO. You've been there for 30 years. You are the most respected person in that entire building. When they force Arthur out, the board will need an interim CEO. You will be the only logical choice." Our plan began to take shape right there on that park bench. It was a multi-stage corporate coup. First, we needed to frame the narrative. I wrote a detailed, anonymous letter to be sent to the 3 key board members. The letter wouldn't be from me. It would be written from the perspective of a concerned senior employee who had stumbled upon evidence of gross financial misconduct. It laid out the timeline of the Swiftbox disaster, highlighting the sheer incompetence of the deal. It spoke of rumors of corruption surrounding the contract's negotiation. It didn't provide the evidence itself, but it planted the seeds of doubt and suspicion. Its purpose was to put the board on high alert, to make them question Arthur's leadership before the real blow fell. Second, Margaret began to quietly prepare for the transition. She started working on a contingency plan for the company, framed as a response to the financial losses from the Swiftbox deal. It was, in reality, a strategic roadmap for her first 90 days as CEO. It included plans to renegotiate the contract with Swiftbox or terminate it, citing the fraudulent inducement, streamline management, and restore employee morale. She was building the ship she was about to captain. Third, and most critically, was the delivery of the evidence, the silver bullet. We couldn't just email it. That was too traceable, too easily dismissed as a hack or a forgery. We needed something undeniable. The company's annual shareholder meeting was in 2 weeks. It was usually a dull, scripted affair held in a hotel ballroom. But this year, it would be the stage for our final act. The plan was simple. Margaret would attend the meeting as usual. I, using a fake identity, would get a job with the hotel's AV team for that day. During the open Q&A session, a moment when the floor microphones would be active, I would use my access to the control booth to override the system. I wouldn't just play an audio file. I would project the documents themselves onto the main screen behind the podium where my father and brother would be sitting. The falsified expense report, the payment authorizations to the shell company, the damning signatures, all of it displayed for every shareholder and every board member to see. There would be no denying it, no spinning it. It would be irrefutable, public, and humiliating. As we finalized the details, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. This was more than revenge. This was justice. It was a meticulously crafted plan to save the company I loved from the family I no longer recognized. Arthur and Daniel thought they had cast me out into the darkness. They had no idea I was about to walk back into the light, and I was bringing the truth with me like a loaded gun. The day of the annual shareholder meeting was gray and overcast, a perfect mirror of my mood. I felt a nervous tension thrumming just beneath my skin, but it was overshadowed by a cold, unwavering resolve. Under the pseudonym Alice, I had been hired as a temporary AV tech for the hotel's conference center. My uniform, a simple black polo shirt and black pants, made me virtually invisible. I spent the morning helping set up projectors and test microphones, my heart pounding every time my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, who was already inside, making small talk and observing the attendees. The ballroom filled slowly. I saw the board members take their seats in the front row. The 3 I was targeting, a stern-faced venture capitalist named Chen, a sharp real estate mogul named Isabella, and a retired manufacturing CEO named Frank, were all there, looking impatient. My anonymous letter, which Margaret confirmed they had all received, had done its job. They were no longer passive observers. They were watching Arthur with a new, critical eye. Then my father and brother walked onto the stage to a polite smattering of applause. Arthur looked confident and authoritative in his tailored suit, the picture of a successful CEO. Daniel sat beside him, looking smug and self-satisfied. They had weathered the Swiftbox storm, or so they thought. They had sacrificed me, taken a financial hit, and now believed they were moving on. Seeing them up there, so oblivious to the reckoning that was about to befall them, I felt a flicker of pity. It was quickly extinguished by the memory of my father's cold eyes as he slid the severance agreement across his desk. From my perch in the AV booth at the back of the room, I had a perfect view of the stage and the massive screen behind it. I had my personal laptop connected to a secondary input on the main switcher, the files open and ready. All I had to do was press a single button to hijack the presentation. Arthur began his speech, a polished and predictable monologue about navigating challenges and being poised for future growth. He glossed over the Swiftbox disaster, calling it a valuable learning experience. He praised Daniel for his bold vision in securing new business. The hypocrisy was so thick I could almost taste it. I looked at the 3 key board members. Chen was staring at his phone, Isabella was whispering to Frank, and Frank was frowning, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. They weren't buying it. After what felt like an eternity, Arthur finished and opened the floor for the Q&A session. This was my moment. The first few questions were softballs from friendly shareholders. Then Frank, the retired CEO, stood up and walked to a microphone. "Arthur," he began, his voice booming through the ballroom, "you referred to the Swiftbox situation as a learning experience. To many of us, a multi-million-dollar loss looks less like a lesson and more like a catastrophic failure of leadership. I received a rather disturbing letter last week suggesting that the issues with this contract go far beyond simple incompetence. Can you provide this room with a more detailed, more honest explanation of how that deal was negotiated? The air in the room went still. Arthur was visibly taken aback. His practiced smile tightened. Frank, I assure you, all of our contracts are negotiated with the utmost diligence. The letter you refer to is baseless, the work of a disgruntled employee, no doubt. Is it? Isabella, the real estate mogul, stood up from her seat without waiting for a microphone. Because I also received that letter. And it raises serious questions about fiduciary duty. Were all details of this negotiation disclosed to the board? The trap was sprung. My father was on the defensive, cornered by the very people he needed to impress. Daniel started to fidget, his smugness evaporating into visible panic. This was my cue. My hand hovered over the button on the switcher. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath. Now. I pressed the button. Behind Arthur and Daniel, the company logo on the massive screen vanished. It was replaced by a crystal-clear image of Daniel's falsified expense report for his non-existent trip to Chicago. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. I switched the image to the steakhouse receipt, with the MT signature clearly visible. Then, the final, devastating blow. The scanned payment authorizations to Silver Creek Holdings for $175,000, with Arthur's and Daniel's signatures displayed 10 feet high for all to see. For a moment, there was dead silence. Arthur and Daniel hadn't realized what was happening behind them, but they saw it in the faces of the audience, in the horrified stares of the board members. They slowly turned around. I will never forget the look on my father's face. The color drained from it, his mask of authority crumbling into pure, unadulterated shock. Daniel looked like he was going to be physically sick. Margaret chose that exact moment to make her move. She stood up, her voice calm but powerful, cutting through the stunned silence. For the benefit of the board and our shareholders, allow me to explain what you are looking at. You are looking at irrefutable proof that the Swiftbox contract was secured through a criminal bribe, paid by Daniel Thompson and authorized by our CEO, Arthur Thompson. They paid $175,000 to a shell company owned by the contract negotiator. In return, they received a deal so toxic it has already cost this company millions and has exposed every one of us to massive legal liability. Chaos erupted. Shareholders were shouting. Reporters in the back began frantically typing on their laptops. Arthur grabbed the microphone, his voice trembling with rage. This is a fabrication, a lie. My daughter is behind this, a bitter, fired employee. But it was too late. The evidence was on the screen. His denial sounded weak, pathetic. Chen, the venture capitalist, stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. Arthur, sit down, you are finished. He looked at the other board members. I call for an immediate emergency session of the board right now. Security, please escort Mr. Thompson and Mr. Thompson Jr. to a waiting room. Do not let them leave. Hotel security moved swiftly toward the stage. My father stood frozen, his authority stripped away in a matter of seconds. Daniel was already weeping, a broken man. As they were led off the stage, past the shocked faces of their colleagues and investors, my father's eyes scanned the room, searching, and for a moment, they met mine in the dark of the AV booth. There was no anger in his gaze anymore, only a look of utter, devastating defeat. I slipped out of the booth and walked out of the hotel, my job done. The ashes of my father's and brother's careers were still smoldering in that ballroom, but from them, something new could finally begin to grow. The fallout from the shareholder meeting was swift and brutal. Within an hour, the board had voted unanimously to terminate Arthur and Daniel for cause, citing gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. Margaret was appointed interim CEO, just as we had planned. The news hit the financial press by the end of the day. The story was everywhere. Thompson Freight CEO and son fired in bribery scandal uncovered at shareholder meeting. My name was never mentioned. To the world, The information had come from a brave, anonymous whistleblower within the company. I watched the drama unfold from the quiet of my apartment, feeling a strange mix of vindication and melancholy. I had won. I had achieved everything I set out to do. The men who had betrayed me were disgraced, their careers in ruins. The company I loved was in the capable hands of Margaret. The employees' jobs were safe. Yet there was no triumphant joy, only a quiet, somber satisfaction. I was watching my family implode, and even though they deserved it, it was still my family. A week later, Margaret called me. "It's done," she said, her voice tired but firm. "We've retained an external legal team to handle the SEC investigation, and we're fully cooperating. We've already reached out to Swiftbox to declare the contract void on the grounds of fraudulent inducement." Their lawyers folded immediately. They don't want their name anywhere near this scandal. The penalty clauses are gone. "And my father and Daniel?" I asked. "Arthur and Daniel have lawyered up, of course," she said. "They've been advised to stay silent. The board is pursuing legal action to claw back their salaries and bonuses for the last 2 years, and it's very likely they'll face federal charges. It's over for them, Elizabeth, truly over." She paused. "The board also approved a settlement. For you." "A settlement?" "For wrongful termination," she explained. "I told them the whole story, what Arthur did to you. They were appalled. They've offered you a significant financial package and a formal, public apology from the company. And, of course, they want you to come back." My breath caught in my throat. Come back. "I want you back," Margaret said firmly. "I need a chief operating officer I can trust. Someone who knows this business better than anyone. The job is yours, Elizabeth, no questions asked. Come home." I thought about it for a long time. The idea of returning to the office, of walking those halls again, was both tempting and terrifying. It was a place of triumph, but also of immense pain. A few days later, a package arrived at my door. It was from my mother, who had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, caught between her husband and her daughter. Inside was a simple letter. She didn't excuse my father's actions, but she spoke of a broken man, of the shame that had shattered their lives. She begged me to find it in my heart to not let hate consume me. At the bottom, she wrote, "Your father built that company on your grandfather's legacy, but he lost his way. Perhaps it needs someone with your strength to find its way back." Her words, more than anything, made my decision. I accepted the COO position. Walking back into that building was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Some employees looked at me with awe, others with fear. They didn't know the specifics, but they knew I was the catalyst for the storm that had swept the old guard away. But under Margaret's leadership, we began to heal the company. We focused on transparency, on rebuilding trust with our employees and clients. We invested in the technology I had begged for years earlier. We promoted talented people from within, people who had been overlooked by my father's regime. We were building a new foundation, one based on merit and integrity, not nepotism and corruption. I never spoke to my father or brother again. I heard through my mother that they avoided jail time by cooperating with the federal investigation into Marcus Thorne and Swiftbox, but their fines were crippling. They lost everything: their money, their reputations, their place in the industry they had once dominated. They moved away, disgraced and forgotten. My victory wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, steady work of rebuilding. It was seeing the relief on the faces of our employees, knowing their futures were secure. It was earning the respect of a board that now saw me for my competence, not my last name. It was sitting across from Margaret in a board meeting, 2 women leading a company into a new era, and feeling a profound sense of peace. I had been forced out, blamed, and betrayed. But in the end, I didn't just find evidence. I found my own strength, and in using it, I didn't just reclaim my career. I rebuilt a legacy.